Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to dive into just 7 days that, honestly, might have set the stage for an entire year. Let's break down the absolutely chaotic, conflict-filled first week of January 2026.
So, the week kicked off just like you'd expect, right? With this huge collective feeling of hope. You saw it everywhere, from the iconic Harbor Bridge in Sydney all the way to Times Square in New York. The whole world just kind of erupted in this massive celebration for the new year.
But that hope, it didn't last, not for everyone. And this incredible stark contrast between celebration and, well, catastrophe, it really sets the stage for a week that was just defined by crisis and conflict. A world of extremes, really.
All right, so let's dig into that first, this dramatic contrast. We're going to look at how the very first moments of 2026 showed a world that was, completely split, happening at the exact same time as the clock struck midnight.
It's almost like a split-screen reality, On one side, you've got cities like London and Dubai just lighting up their skies. But on the other, in places like Hong Kong and Lucerne, the parties were called off. They were quiet, not because they wanted to be, but because they were in mourning.
And the reason for all that mourning? A truly catastrophic fire at the Lake Constellation Bar, a popular spot in a Swiss ski resort. What investigators think happened is that some of those decorative sparklers, you know the ones, they ignited the insulation in the ceiling. 40 people died. And what's just heartbreaking is that many were tourists, and get this, half of them were under 18 years old.
Now that fire was a horrific, tragic incident, but in a way it was almost a grim preview of what was about to unfold. Because right away, the new year just exploded with these very open, very aggressive power plays and military moves on the world stage.
Okay, so then on January 3rd, something pretty stunning happens. We're talking elite U.S. Delta Force units carrying out Operation Absolute Resolve. It was a nighttime raid right on the presidential residence in Caracas. They captured President Nicolas Maduro and his wife literally while they were asleep.
So next thing you know, Maduro's flown to the U.S., he's standing in a federal court, and his plea is simple: not guilty. He says, "I was kidnapped." At the same time, you have President Trump announcing that the U.S. would, for a time, run Venezuela and, in his words, get the oil flowing.
And at the exact same time, literally halfway across the world, a very fragile ceasefire just shatters. Syrian government forces, we're talking with tanks, with drone strikes, they launch a massive, full-scale assault on the Kurdish neighborhoods in Aleppo.
And the human cost was, well, it was immediate and it was immense. Over 162,000 civilians were forced to just pick up and flee their homes. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights had a chilling way to describe the government's bombardment. They called it, and this is a direct quote, one of the harshest waves of terror.
And believe it or not, the week's conflicts didn't even stop there. In the war in Ukraine, reports came out that Russia deployed nuclear-capable missiles for what they were calling massive strikes on Kiev. This was a huge, dangerous escalation, especially because peace talks were supposedly in the works.
Okay, so with all of this stuff erupting all at once, you have to ask the big question, right? What about the systems we have in place to stop this kind of chaos? How did they do? Well, what we saw was a system that was under just immense strain. You could really see the cracks starting to show in the global order.
First, let's just quickly define a key concept here: multilateralism. It sounds complicated, but it's really just the basic idea that countries should work together to solve big problems. And boy, was that idea put to the test this week.
And you could see that test in the actions of the United States, plain as day. The Trump administration put out this huge executive order, pulling the U.S. out of 66 international organizations. And these weren't small groups. They were targeting programs on climate, on human rights, and global trade.
But at the same time, you saw the complete opposite happening. In a really stark contrast, Ukraine's allies got together in Paris. They weren't pulling out of things. They were doubling down, strengthening their partnership. They agreed on new ways to provide long-term defense and real security guarantees for Ukraine.
So all this tension, it wasn't just happening between nations. It was also boiling over within them. You had citizens in several countries just taking to the streets, which opened up a whole new front in this chaotic week: people versus power. And maybe the most dramatic example of this was in Iran. Widespread anger just exploded into the biggest protest the country had seen in decades. People were setting fire to government buildings. The authorities' response? They shut down the internet, almost completely.
And then, the supreme leader, Khamenei, basically promised that a much harsher crackdown was on its way. And this internal fire was just fanned by some extreme pressure from the outside. The U.S. started issuing these very direct threats about how the Iranian regime was handling the protests, and it all came to a head with President Trump delivering this incredibly blunt, direct warning to Iran's leaders.
And look, this theme of internal struggle, it wasn't just an isolated thing in Iran. You had the UN warning about repression and things going backwards for democracy in Uganda right before their elections. And then in Myanmar, the military junta just went ahead with these elections that everyone knew were flawed, basically designed to guarantee they keep their power.
Okay, so let's take a breath. What does all this mean? I mean, how do you even begin to make sense of this whirlwind of conflict and systems under pressure and people rising up, all happening in the same week?
Well, the really important thing to remember is that none of this happened in a vacuum, right? All these big, flashy headline events, they were unfolding on top of a whole bunch of other global crises that are always just simmering in the background. We're talking about humanitarian disasters in places like Gaza and Sudan, economic worries, the climate, all these things that are challenging stability every single day. And that leaves us with one final and kind of scary thought. We've just gone through 7 incredibly intense days. So you have to ask yourself, was this just one crazy week, or is it a sign of something bigger for the year ahead? Is this kind of intense, overlapping crisis, is this our new normal?